again, we're back for episode 54 of Customers Who Click. Today's guest is Jon Halley of Wonderkind, and we're going to be talking about the importance and power of first-party data. Something I go on and on about is how important it is to build up your own customer database and enrich it with quality data about those customers, both implicit and explicit. As we'll discover shortly, this data makes your entire marketing strategy more powerful, from acquisition through to customer service and retention. First-party data helps you give a much more personalized and intimate experience to your customers, making them far more likely to become engaged and retained by your business. Let's get Jon on now to explain more. Hi, Jon. Thanks for joining me today. Do you want to give us a bit of your background, a bit about you, why you are doing what you do at the moment?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, Will. So my name's Jon Halley. I'm the European Executive Director for New Business at Wonderkind. So I joined the organisation about 3 years ago to help scale the business outside of the US. So we're a New York headquartered business, and I now own the strategy and execution of our European new business go-to-market. I guess prior to that, about 11 years in B2B SaaS with the likes of sort of ServiceNow and Box. Why I do what I do is a good question. So I love a challenge. I'm a passionate problem solver. So I think I've purposely plumped for working at disruptive sort of hyper growth businesses where they're relatively early entrants into Europe. And then what this means ultimately is you're helping build a business, put your own imprint on it, and having a bit more of a meaningful impact than you perhaps could at others. And then I think the other important bit is around development. So I've had the privilege of working for a number of incredibly talented people, and I've always been of the opinion that whatever you've learned it's only right to be passing that stuff on. So empowering those within the org, it's one of the incredibly satisfying parts of what I do.
Awesome. Yeah. I've been in startups. It's where I kind of began. So yeah, I'm well aware what it's like to like open a new office, for example, and lead things, and even be kind of, I guess, one of the only real marketers in a company that actually has already about 100 people. Do you want to give us just a quick intro to Wonderkind and what the business does as well?
Yeah, sure. So we're a performance marketing channel that ultimately scales like one-to-one messaging. So I think the topic of today is around first-party data. So a lot of what we'll probably end up talking about has some form of connotation to the sort of value that we drive. We are solely focused on retail, on e-commerce vendors throughout Europe and the UK specifically. Work with over 450 retail brands at the moment, and as I said earlier, we're headquartered out of New York.
Awesome, cool. Well, let's dive into first-party data then. I guess, do you want to give like a very brief introduction to it? Like, what is it? Why should people care? Why is it important? How it differs from third-party data and stuff like that?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So I guess I'll talk about it from the perspective of retailers, because it's kind of what I know, and I can talk to that probably slightly better. So I guess as it pertains to retailers, first-party data is really information that's kind of collected physically by them from their customers and from their audiences. So it's directly from the source, so to speak. I think particularly for retailers, it tends to come from probably two buckets. So firstly, you've got on-site. So that could be things like behavior, it could be preferences, it could be intent. And then secondly, you've got CRM related data. So that could be, things like purchase history, frequency, and, birthdays and these sorts of things. I guess why it's important, there's a number of pieces to it, I guess, to keep it relatively high level. I think the primary pieces are it's there to help increase things like campaign effectiveness, create more bespoke and more personalized customer journeys. But ultimately, like the more you can learn about like your customer, the better you can market to them, and the better the conversion propensity of your visits is going to be. I think it's also fairly safe to say at the moment that it's increasing in importance. So if you think about the growth of things like text message marketing, the implications of iOS 14 and the cookie expiration windows, the more of this kind of first party data that you're able to collect and enrich, like the more value there is to be driven from retailers using this sort of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do loads of work in kind of personalization, segmentation, CRM, like retention, that sort of stuff. So yeah, having that first party data and being able to pull a segment of customers who have bought a certain category of product and who show these kind of similar bits of data, whether it's, a birthday or a location or something. Mm-hmm. Really important because, it just lets you personalize that information a bit better as well. So, there's there's loads more you can do with it as a business, because I suppose you can you just have more data about your customer, you can understand them better. But from a customer point of view, they are getting better communications as well.
Yeah.
So their experience is a bit better. Are there any are there any kind of misconceptions about first party data or about first party versus third party?
Sure. So I guess we hear a couple. Again, I can talk specifically to Wonderkind. So I think one that we hear quite frequently is that you only need first party data, right? And I think the challenge of that is that it can fundamentally limit your understanding of a wider web audience. So a good blend of both enables organizations, specifically retailers, to kind of model things at scale, right? So if you think about like data enrichment and using first and third party data in tandem, like Facebook prospecting, right? It gives you access to 30 to 35-year-olds within London, right? Who may not have first-party data on. The ability to leverage third-party data in that instance enables you to make more sort of informed marketing decisions on like how you can go and target and acquire them. You may also then think about like from a physical retail outlet, so using things like electoral data to determine like where your next store is going to go. The usage of this is ultimately is driving sort of significant investment decisions. So that would be kind of one of them. I think the other misconception that we hear, and again, I often say this work related, if I can get through a conversation without mentioning GDPR, then we're having a pretty good day. But I think the other really standout misconception that I hear a lot of is that GDPR prohibits the use of third-party data. So assuming that like transparency, safeguards, and the relative like regulatory controls are in place, there is nothing preventing an organization leveraging third-party data to inform and base marketing decisions on and communicate, right? I think the other piece to this as well that I would argue is using this, you're actioning based on consent. And I would argue that specific consent in this instance, like, is naturally going to drive better performance. So I often use the example when talking to partners and customers and the like, that you're going to get a better level of performance from a remarketing via triggered email as you would do perhaps through display retargeting, because the individual is specifically consenting into receiving the former and not necessarily the latter.
Yep, absolutely makes sense. GDPR, yeah, really valid point. I think it just got, don't know if overhyped is the right way of putting it, but it got kind of blown out of proportion. I think everyone thought that, like, the world was going to end for marketers back in May 18, I think it was. And I don't feel like a lot has changed. There probably are a few more opt-in boxes out there, but I think there are still plenty of companies who don't quite follow the rules and just say, by filling out this form, you also opt into our marketing, you also opt in to receive marketing communications and things.
Edge of a cliff moment, much like the millennium bug, right? We woke up the next day and the world was still spinning on its axis. So I think the way that we often refer to it is the introduction of it is ultimately regulation catching up with consumer preference. So we are now being marketed to in a manner that we have consented to, right? So there's not been a massive tectonic shift in the whole thing. It's just the fact that the way marketeers operate now needs to just be a little bit more consensual.
I agree. I guess one thing I kind of always felt was, while it's annoying when you buy from a brand, it was annoying when they also added you to their marketing list. It was a bit annoying, but it wasn't the worst thing. I feel like GDPR kind of, the thing it should have done was stop really bad behavior. So, I don't know, selling lists, buying lists, emailing someone who's never even heard of you, because that's what really bothers people. That's when their data's getting into the hands of other people and they're not aware. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I just felt like I didn't feel like on the when it came. Well, I mean, we're only really talking about email marketing and things like that. I guess one thing GDPR has done is improve a bit of security as well, but around data breaches. But just when it comes to whether you've got an opt-in, like that definite, clear opt-in to an email, I wonder how many people were actually bothered by that. and how many people just went, oh well, I'll just unsubscribe, or maybe they just, maybe they get annoyed with that business and stop and not come back to that business. But yeah, I wonder how many people were actually seriously concerned that a brand that they purchased from just started to email them marketing stuff. I have very mixed feelings about GDPR. I don't really. I mean, yeah, from my experience, I don't really feel like it's changed that much, because the people doing the bad stuff are still doing it. Yeah, I still get loads of emails. I still get. In fact, recently I've been getting loads of like scam calls, and so my data must have got out somewhere. And I'm never going to hear of someone getting a massive fine because my data got released, breached. But yeah, so what are the, you mentioned there's a misconception around you only need first party data. What are some of the key things a brand should be doing when marketing and trying to grow regarding that first party, third party data?
Great question. I guess where to start with that. So I guess, firstly, something I read recently. So I think if you look at a 30,000 foot view at e-com in general, right? E-com is expected to grow, I think, about 14% by the end of this year to just shy of about $5 trillion, right? Over the next 3 years, up to 2024, it's just going to be shy of like $6 trillion. So what the reason I'm going down this path, right, is the overall e-com opportunity is increasing in size. So from a growth perspective, like, retailers need to be at the front of the pack because they need to be maximizing the slice of spend that is inevitably going to be increasing, given the world that we currently find ourselves in. So the counter to that is that if you're not keeping pace with that kind of percentage increase, then there's an argument that you're regressing in size, right? So that creates a whole different problem. So a couple of things to consider, I guess, relating to first and third party data. So at a very high level, like, I would argue that, looking at things like where you're acquiring your customers from, like what's the specific strategy there? Are you looking at quality versus quantity? Like most of the organizations that we happen to speak to in the UK specifically are very, very laser focused on the profitability of the cohorts of individuals that they typically go after. And then probably more specific to some of the first party data bit is around the general unit economics of things, right? So on that acquisition strategy, whether it's data capture or whether it's just getting people to the site, like, are you offering discounts in return for X, Y, and Z? Like, are you leveraging like heavy, like, margin gobbling things like affiliate based marketing channels and such, right? Because if you are, like, there's obviously some concerns there, in the further reaching part of it. I'm by no stretch of the imagination, an expert in this field per se, but I speak to hundreds of retailers in an annual period, and a major theme right now, seemingly tying into the first party data bit, is really striking a better balance between buying your audience versus making it or building it, right? So which is where that kind of first party data capture comes in, because the argument would be, if you can get better at the latter, then the cost implications of the former are, they're very plain to see. Yeah,
I think I agree. Well, I definitely agree. Yeah, there's a lot of conversation around buying buying customers not customers, buying an audience or creating an audience, which I guess is the same thing. It's the same concept whether you're e-commerce or content. It's really easy to buy the audience. You can set ads up, you can run Facebook ads, PPC, whatever. You will generate sales, but if you don't take it any further, you're going to get that one sale per person, and you're going to have to reacquire them every single time. So then capturing that first party data, but then using it properly. So having those better conversations. I suppose I think you mentioned one-to-one conversations right at the start, didn't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess do you want to tell us a bit more about that actually? Why, like, what that really means and how? Because obviously one-to-one conversations doesn't sound scalable.
Yeah, I mean, it's that's the challenge, right? And again, without turning this into a Wonderkind sales pitch, I think just simply looking at how you communicate with your audience in general, right? There are many different ways. I think one of the biggest challenges that marketers face is that they've got 20 plus channels to pick from. Users are visiting the website on multiple different devices at any one point in time. So it makes naturally like one-to-one communication very challenging. The interesting thing is when you then start stripping back and looking at things like the revenue per send for something like a triggered email versus something like a programmatic or BAU email, right? So I would argue the former is very much on a more of a one-to-one basis because it's based on specific intent shown from a user on site, and then an email is activated off the back of that to that person. Whereas a business as usual or programmatic email, irrespective of how sophisticated your segmentation might be, you're never going to get the same bang for buck, right? So one of the challenges that we help a lot of organizations, or one of the gaps that we help kind of traverse is scaling the number of the one-to-one, the high-performing messages that brands are able to send. How we do that, happy to kind of get into perhaps a later date, but it's fundamentally about how do you know and identify more people that you're paying via these very expensive acquisition channels to come back to your website. So that's ultimately the challenge and the delta of it. I think a lot of it then boils back into the kind of creation and ownership of your channels and building your audiences. Because if you build them, own them, then paying for them multiple times to come back and purchase again almost kind of goes away, and you're in control of that, and the cost implications thereafter are clear for everyone to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you can bring back the customers yourself, you're paying like pennies to bring people back each time, whereas if you're relying on advertising, you could be paying £5, £10, £20, maybe more. It obviously depends on the business. I worked in the gambling industry for a little bit, and if you had to reacquire a person through acquisition, you were probably looking at maybe £100. And actually, sorry, that was probably through like branded PPC. It could be anything from 100 to 300, depending on the channel. So it's just ridiculously expensive. Whereas, once they're in, you've got the email set up, you might be paying, 10, 20,000 a year for your email platform when you've got, we're talking hundreds of thousands, if not millions of customers. So on a per send, per customer basis, it's just costing you nothing to bring people back. And once you've got them in for that first time, it does become a lot easier. I was about to say something that I actually disagree with. I think a lot of businesses almost do assume that once someone's in for the first time, it's job done. But I think you'll agree, especially with the one-to-one conversation piece, it's absolutely not. You've still got to nurture them, got to build that relationship, which is where first-party data comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the simplest ways of thinking about it, and if I ever have to talk to anybody outside of the industry that we're in, that really helps conceptualize the challenge is, if you think about what Facebook and Google are particularly good at, right, it's knowing billions of people across the globe, right? So you're paying ultimately for the opportunity to have the people that they know come to your website and hopefully purchase something. What they're not quite as au fait with is helping you nurture a relationship with them, identify them, and then bring them into this piece that we're talking about here, which is owning them and curating that journey and curating the conversation and having that one-to-one based relationship with them, right? So that's the challenge. And then baking back into the first party data, it's the more of the stuff that you can capture and own, the more of the outcome you're able to determine yourselves. Yeah,
I mean, like you say, they're really good at that. They know their audience. They're really good at letting companies pay to drive that audience to their websites. But I'm sure if they had it their own way, they would try and build that whole kind of e-commerce ecosystem within the platform. I mean, we're seeing it with social commerce already. Being able to buy from Instagram and channels like that. So, yeah, I'm pretty sure if Facebook had their own way, the customer would never leave Facebook. They'd be able to get everything they need from it. Fortunately, I don't think it's ever going to go down that way. And I can't see a lot of the bigger brands. I can't see any sensible brands doing it, to be honest. No. I don't know if I should have said that, but
yeah, they might be listening more. Careful.
Yeah. What are some of the mistakes brands make when, I guess, building their audiences, but yes, I guess related to first and third party data?
Yeah. So I think I alluded to this a minute ago. So again, going over old ground a little bit here, but I think the biggest issue, right, is that an e-commerce or digital like retailers, they have 20 plus channels to choose from. They have the device issue of people coming to site on multiple. So I think one of the biggest things that we see is that like there is not a one size fits all way of building an audience, right? So I often say that the level of sophistication has to improve the more complex something becomes. So we see a couple of things. Like, first and foremost, so many brands are just so heavily reliant on discounting, right? And that tends to teach relatively bad habits. So if you think about something like exit intent, which is something that we pioneered, doesn't have to be like a margin destroying giveaway in order to redeem some form of information with that action, right? So calling out like an existing value proposition on site that has a lower financial impact to you, but also justifies the intent that individual was showing during that journey, is a significantly better thing to do once they're exiting. I think the really important thing here is the sophistication aspect. So, this is a specific action based on a specific individual, going back to that one-to-one piece that may or may not be right for the whole cohort of traffic that you brought through that specific channel that got them there in the first place. The second mistake that I see a lot of, and I find super frustrating, going back to, again, bashing Google and Facebook again, which is probably not a great idea, but many of the brands we talk to are just hooked on Google and Facebook and have probably underinvested or are late to the party when it comes to the growing of their audience or building their own audience. So having a really solid strategy for data capture, audience growth, is super important. So once you've acquired that individual, back to the point we made a minute ago, like, why would you want to double or triple the cost each time they're ready to buy again? Right? Yeah. Demographics in particular, like if you look at Gen Z and millennials, they will give data away freely if they see value in doing so. So I was talking to a colleague of mine, was it this week or last, someone a little younger than me, I'm not going to go into that, but so Depop was a great example. So, the whole process for installing that app, like, you've then got to go through a process of building a profile. There's a bundle of questions you've got to answer around brand preference, around sizing, around so on and so on and so on. That it takes up to about 5 minutes, right, until you've got to a stage where you can browse products on it. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up here is that there are demographics, particularly Gen Z millennials, that are more than happy to give data away if they can see a specific reason for doing so, which is probably in this instance is like a better user experience. But I think the biggest challenge is that we've just become so reliant on just pumping money into these huge, massive performance marketing engine to drive people to the site. We haven't really thought about like the connotations of like what else there might be to help drive a revenue-based opportunity that involves owning that stuff and kind of the control of it thereafter.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, in I think the very first episode of this the Customers a Click podcast, I spoke with Will Stewart-Jones from 3 Radical, and they have this kind of concept of earned data, which is just what you've been talking about. Really, if someone sees the value in it, they'll be happy to kind of give that data away. And I guess even the phrasing of that sounds a bit negative, I guess, or I don't know. It's got a weird connotation to it, but it's just, the explanation of, it's just what you were saying with Depop. It's that you're not really giving away data in that sense. I don't think there's any privacy issues with me telling a business that I'm more interested in this type of product over this type of product. If it gives me a better experience on their app or website, it's better for me. And I do think, like you said, people are willing to give away data. People are willing to be helpful. They're willing to tell businesses how to be better. And this is an example. It's a little bit different because it's customer survey. But I've done one with a client recently, and the response rate has been fantastic. But also on the second survey we did to half their database, 85% of respondents said they'd be willing to speak to the company about their feedback in more detail. Mm-hmm. And I think part of that was because the questions we were asking were about the customer. It was, how do you feel about your products? What would have helped you in the buying process? What did you need to know more? It wasn't, how did you rate the website? Do you like this feature? That sort of stuff. So I know that's not quite the same as, first party data and that sort of thing, but it's still, people are willing to give that information if they think it's going to lead to a better experience for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you then layer on top of that, I think on average across most retailers, online, only like 75% of people that visit your website won't buy anything in that session, right? So what is your strategy for individuals that you are still paying for to acquire to get them there in the first place? And this is what I mean about the strategy. You have to have a strategy in place for this, because there's a massive missed opportunity, and also the cost implications of that by driving these people there and not really getting anything out of them each time. And then extrapolate that over multiple different retailers that perhaps have higher consideration purchases, like the luxury fashion world and all this sort of stuff. Like that whole problem is exacerbated, 4 to 5x, because the amount of times that people are coming back before they place a purchase is, potentially 9 or 11 sessions, right? So that whole notion of having a fair exchange, or fair value exchange, let's call it, maybe for an email address, maybe for some other data that might be relevant to you as a retailer, so that you can use that or get some value from it, and also then encourage a better CX or a better just general engagement with that individual. It's it's a super missed opportunity for a lot of retailers out there.
Yeah, definitely. I like what you mentioned earlier about exit intents and discounting. Obviously, discounting it's just, I guess, I don't know if it's just considered best practice or something, or if everyone feels that because everyone is doing it, we have to do it as well. But it's, you're right, that exit intent, 99% of the time when I see them, there's a discount on them. And a discount is not going to get me to purchase at that stage. What a discount is going to do is take 10% off the purchase when I have actually been convinced that I'm going to buy it. But that convincing is done, by the website, by the information, maybe by some further emails. So maybe as an incentive to get people onto your email list, it does work. But it's similarly actually with abandoned carts. I think there's the same issue. Fortunately now, at least most of the time, the first abandoned cart email is not discounted. But quite often one of the emails later will. But also what happens is most of the time that first email is just, you left something in your basket. Here is that product. And that's it. Mm-hmm. So it does nothing to add to the experience to try and convince you to buy. It's literally a case of, we're convinced you're going to buy. For some reason, you just forgot to actually hit the checkout button. That's kind of what it is. When, like you say, 75% of people, well, it's probably even more, aren't going to buy from a website, at least the first time round. So if you can get a product in a basket, you've still got a job to, there's a reason they left. For some reason, some people, that reason might be they ran out of time, just got distracted by something else. They might come back naturally and buy it, but it doesn't hurt to kind of put those benefits back in front of them and that value. I think that's one of my biggest peeves at the moment, pet peeves. Yeah, I think it's just this assumption that once someone's on a website, or once you've got their email address, it's kind of job done. And actually, I know I keep going on, but what you said right at the start of that, actually, about companies, being obsessed with Google and Facebook and just pumping money into there and not really focusing on the retention side. I think there is just a case of, it's almost like Google and Facebook, and the acquisition is the hard part. That's where you've really got to, really put the time and attention in, because also you're pumping money into it. So you're spending all that money. So therefore that money needs more resource, more care and attention. Once they're in, once you've got them into your CRM platform, it's like job done. Like, you've got them, now you've just got to hit them with an email every now and again to bring them back. But yeah, I think hopefully, over the next, it should still be happening now, but hopefully we'll see more and more companies taking a bit more of a personalised and segmented approach to those emails.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Do you see any big trends coming up in the way businesses approach first-party data? I suppose the whole iOS 14 thing might come into this.
Yeah, so I think we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier on, but I think it's pretty worthwhile giving a bit more airtime on it. So, I mean, look, the headline here is there's going to be an increased focus on the usage and reliance on first-party data, in my personal opinion, but certainly based on what we're seeing and hearing in the wider retail sort of landscape. I think there's two things happening. You've alluded to the first. I think the iOS 14 update, so in a nutshell, users can now ultimately opt out of being or having their data transfer between the apps that exist on the phone. So you could be, browsing on Safari or Chrome, and Facebook and Google can no longer use that data for advertising purposes. So you're naturally going to see a scaling back at the effectiveness of those channels that you're investing in. And you're not just going to get the same impact or level of return from it in general. I think the other thing that's kind of on the horizon, or has been kind of bubbling up to the surface for a fair length of time, is the kind of cookie apocalypse, right? So I think Safari set this trend, and a lot of the other browsers that we all operate with now are kind of following suit. So by the end of 2022, it'll be a vastly different landscape there. So I guess, what does that mean for the first party data realms? I think there's naturally just going to be this increase in the usage of it in general, and also thereafter the scaling of owned channel marketing more aggressively. So we're seeing certainly that more and more brands are really laser focused on data capture. They're kind of growing their audiences more so than paying for it, which is obviously ties into what we were talking about earlier. But I think one of the really interesting things that we're certainly seeing both in the UK and US at the moment is there's been a real surge in text message marketing. So reaching brand new audiences on brand new channels, serving the right message to the right person at the right time, but also to the right tool that they use more frequently. These two trends are ultimately going to drive that, right? The first party data and the capturing of it are super important to a lot of this stuff actually happening.
Yeah, I would like to see SMS used a bit more and a bit better. This came up in another episode actually, and I think the brands that pop up in my message inbox are pizza brands and gambling brands. They seem to really make use of it. I'm not sure they're particularly good at it. It definitely, it's still kind of broadcast messaging.
Yeah.
But those are two industries that I've really, really picked up on SMS and use it a lot. I think I barely get anything from any kind of standard e-commerce businesses like fashion or anything like that, unless it is transactional, which is great. I really like SMS used for transactional reasons. So I don't know, confirming an order or shipping related. But I think there's definitely much more they could be doing to use it as a marketing channel. And I think, like you said, the right people are on the right channel at the right time. And I think that's probably where maybe a lot of brands struggle, just trying to actually put the data together to be able to do that.
I think there's also a little bit of behind the scenes. I think the text message or SMS related marketing has historically been quite an expensive medium to communicate with your audience on. That's changing. That's changing gradually. But I think if you look at the bigger picture here, we're talking about own channels being, in most instances underinvested in. So when you've got something that is probably going to perform incredibly well, in their mind's eye, but they aren't able to invest in it given the costs associated to it, it's kind of, a bit of a catch-22 scenario, I think, with a lot of retailers out there.
But it's not a massively expensive channel to get into, is it? It's just expensive to use at scale. But really, it's only expensive if you use it badly. Well, all right, even if you use it well, you're still spending the money. But I think by saying something's expensive, you're saying it's kind of a high cost for the return, really. And I wonder if that's one of the problems with SMS. Like you say, there is a much higher cost to an SMS than an email. And I wonder if loads and loads of marketers and loads of brands have tried to do it before, but they've just used it like they were using email, which was a blast. And so when you send out, 200,000 SMS messages, you get a really low return on it because your messages aren't personalized or anything, which makes that channel look really expensive and therefore not worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely. It balls back to the conversation we had earlier around the differentiation between one-to-one and one-to-many, right? If you're able to serve the right message to the right person at the right time, you're going to get a significantly higher revenue per send, right? So again, it's something, without getting too in the weeds with Wonderkind specifically, it's something we specialize in, and we've seen some unbelievable results with our SMS channel over particularly UK and US. To the point that I think in some instances we're driving 22.5% of overall digital revenue for some organizations at the moment, just based off abandonment emails and SMS channels. So correct to your point, if you do it well, and the level of sophistication like suits the channel we're talking about, then the opportunity is massive. And I think particularly for a lot of retailers, it's relatively untapped. There's also then the ability to communicate to, we talked about Gen Zs and millennials earlier on. They're a differing audience. I'd argue they probably don't spend as much time in their inbox for email, aside from probably signing up to apps and using it for two-factor authentication, right? If you were to send them text messages that were, high impact, relevant to them, they're going to have a performance that's significantly higher than probably sending them even a highly performing email, right? So it's a good balance. Again, it's all about striking that balance between investing in the channels you can own and control personally, and the acquisition mediums that you're investing in to get people there in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree on the kind of email versus that email versus SMS comment. You see, you're much more likely to see it, notice it, and act on it. By act on it, I mean open it, read it, with an SMS than an email, because I think the majority of people probably have notifications on for SMS, and so like as soon as it comes in, there's a high chance someone will look at it. Whereas email is a bit different, especially personal email. People might have business email on, notifications on. I think personal email, I don't think I ever switched it on. My inboxes are filtered as well, so most marketing emails go into a specific marketing email box. Partly that may be me as a marketer, so I want those emails there because I like to go and review them every now and again, rather than act on them as a customer. But the chance of me opening an email within 24 hours is, I'd say, almost zero for a marketing email, because it'll be in that folder. Whereas SMS, there's probably a 90% chance I've opened it within 10 minutes. Just moving on a little bit then. Do you have any pet peeves when it comes to marketing?
I do, but I'm going to be very careful with which ones I air, given the potential audience here. I guess I've got two what stand out, and actually I think one of them ties in very well to what we're kind of talking about here, right? So the generational shift in the channel of choice, right? So communicating one-to-one, so this SMS and email kind of conversation here, right? So I'm 35 years old. I live in my email inbox. Like if I see, let's say, an email from Wiggle that has some form of, razzle dazzle discount or something of interest to me visually or whatever, I'm likely to react really well to that. I'd probably argue a little bit too well in some instances. However, if I then look at, my teenage, nieces and nephew, right? They're glued to their mobile phones. I'm fairly sure that, as I said a minute ago, they only ever use an email inbox for, logging into apps and all that sort of stuff. So again, one of my pet peeves is, do you really think that a really well, regardless of how well it's put together and the level of discount and such that you're putting into that email, do you really think that a well-crafted stream of emails to the latter, my nieces and nephews, is going to perform well, bearing in mind the medium that you're sending it to them on? Or, if you interrupted their mobile screen time, do you think that's going to be a slightly better impact, right? So I think that's one of them. And again, it's a very, very easily solved solution. The main one that I have is, there is fundamentally so much data out there right now that it's still being grossly underutilized. So like cycling, I'm still going to cycling brand XYZ a week after spending an inordinate amount of money on the latest and greatest bit of carbon fiber. Yet as soon as I get to the website, I'm presented with the same inordinate amount of bike that I've already, got there. So for me, that's just frustrating as a user. Take me out of the job that I'm in and the sector that I operate in. To me, that's just the technology exists to address that challenge, but we seemingly rank the acquisition of it higher, right? So the customer in purchasing something is more important than the user experience thereafter. Yeah. So again, I think I made this point a couple of times. I'm just from my, I guess the educated opinion I have, having worked in this industry, we just need to be getting a better balance of these things, right? And technology's there to help bridge that gap. Actually, in both of those examples that I've given you. So yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that's not got me in trouble with any of the brands that I shop from, because I'd like to continue shopping from them. I guess I'm going to put the question back to you, Will. Like, what bugs you? What are your pet peeves?
Oh God, I've got so many. I just comments on yours first, actually. I guess in that first example specifically, it's just a case of having an exit intent pop up that says email or SMS. I mean, it could be that simple, or in the purchase flow, just asking people which one they'd like to opt into, something like that. Where would you prefer to receive your offers? One thing we did in when I was at the gambling company, actually, after GDPR, was we just incentivized different channels. So we'd say, it was partly a compliance thing, because I think, I don't know if it was just our take on it or if it is actually a GDPR thing. You have to get a specific opt-in to each channel individually. That was our understanding at the time. And so we said, well, what we'll do is when people sign up, we'll put a box in front of them and say, you can sign up to email, SMS, calls, and direct mail, and you'll get a small bonus for each of them. And then you kind of work out which ones they want by the ones they either don't opt into or the ones they unsubscribe to shortly afterwards. My pet peeves.
Now you're on the spot.
I feel like I'm one of these people that almost every day I want to tweet or say to someone, do you know what, my biggest pet peeve right now is X, and every day it's something different. I think there's a lot of that just not taking into account where I am in the life cycle with you. So if I have purchased from you, take that into account with your email marketing and stuff. If I haven't purchased from you, maybe I need some more information or education. I don't need an email just full of products, because it's there must be something I'm looking for. If I came to your website, I'm not, no one except marketers like me, obviously. Not many people are browsing loads of different websites and just adding their email addresses in just to receive those weekly email blasts full of products. No one is doing that. So when people capture those emails, through exit intent and stuff, there should be some work done on that first email or first SMS. Like, what are you looking for? Like, what can we help you with? Trying to actually understand what that customer wants and therefore how you can help them, rather than just saying, cool, here's your 10% off discount. And then a few days later, here's 10 different categories you can purchase from. So, I suppose it's relevant to the topic that we've been talking about, that first party data. Really, it's just ask me what I want. I mean, this client I mentioned earlier, the one we did the survey for, a lot of this survey is focused around trying to rebuild the website in a way which will allow customers to find what they're looking for super easily, because it's quite a specific niche, but with quite a lot of options. And that's why we've got loads of information, loads of feedback, because we're asking people what they want. And just not many companies do it, do they? I know there's a lot of talk about pop-ups get in the way. Pop-ups are annoying and stuff, but I think it's the execution. It's the same reason people say email marketing is dead. It's because they're not doing it very well, and so they don't see the value in the channel. And I think it's probably the same with almost every channel where someone says it's rubbish, or it doesn't work and something. It's probably because they're just doing it badly.
Yeah, I think to coin a phrase I used earlier on, I think around the email pop-up piece and just the general, CX of a website, like the level of sophistication, as I said, has to improve the more complex things become, right? Capturing data, I think, for a lot of organizations is seemingly uncharted territory, and therefore is a more complex thing for them to get their head around. What they have to understand is that they need a slightly more sophisticated approach to doing that. And it's not just a case of slinging a pop-up on entrance and like capturing data with a 50% discount and then, interrupting, customer journeys, at any opportunity. It's doing it surgically. It's doing it based on, a level of intent or demonstrating a behavior on a website, and doing it at the right point and period in that journey. And then remembering they've done it as well, I think, is also super important.
Yeah.
Which is challenging, but it's something that we are very well versed in helping retailers do. So we know it well, and I think we're probably dumbing the problem down because we know that we can solve it very easily. But I think just a slightly broader, just more general awareness of this whole notion of using first-party data, particularly with things that are kind of rearing their heads at the moment with the iOS, with the cookie piece. It does feel as though it's kind of coming to an inflection point at the moment where I think a lot of brands are starting to come around to it a little bit more freely, which is great to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like I've probably got the answer to this last question, but is there a particular area of marketing you feel is quite underrated? I suppose, aside from first-party data and SMS.
Very good question. I mean, look, to beat the drum, I still feel like the audience ownership, the owned channel marketing is still such a massive area of opportunity. I think we've said it between the two of us, I think a number of times now, that even like email, in the majority of instances, there are some brands out there that do email incredibly well, and it's upwards of 40-50% of their overall, digital revenue. However, I think for most, it does tend to be the forgotten child, right? And getting that piece right, feeding, good quality data into it, is only going to be, throwing really good quality fuel on the fire. So yeah, I think to cop out of answering that question and try and direct it back to something that is relatively topical for this conversation and also what we do, I very much feel that, that is an area that a lot of brands could be doing more in, right? And again, it helps get them off the addiction to pumping cash into the big boys in Facebook and Google, and it gives them that little bit more ownership, a little bit more creative ownership and execution as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been really fantastic stuff. I think I completely agree with everything, really. There's so much more opportunity in first-party data. I suppose it just needs a little bit more investment and resource from companies. They need to spend a little bit more time actually thinking about the strategies involved with personalizing, using that data, personalizing and focusing on customer retention. If people want to get in touch, find out more, what should they do?
I'm very, very easily contactable. So LinkedIn, probably maybe one of the easier ways or mediums to get hold of me. So I think I'm Jon Halley on LinkedIn. So yeah, any questions, queries, if people want to disagree with me, I'd be more than happy to to have a chat. So again, like if there's anyone listening that's genuinely taken something from this, they would like to know a little bit more about Wonderkind in general and how we typically help other retailers address these sorts of problems, then I will of course be more than welcome the opportunity to have a chat. Perfect. Thanks, Jon. Thank you very much, Will. Appreciate it. The more you learn about your customers, the better you can market to them and to other potential customers. With data-related issues around, the death of cookies and iOS 14, it's even more important that you're collecting this data and doing something with it. As I've said time and time again, if you give your customers a personalized and segmented experience, they'll be far more engaged with your brand and far more valuable to it. I'm sure you're aware of how expensive it is to acquire new customers. So correct usage of first-party data is not only a great way to reduce that cost, but also ensures you keep those customers you acquire for longer. If you'd like to learn more about first-party data and one-to-one conversations, reach out to Jon on LinkedIn. Any other podcast questions, feedback, guest requests, please send them over to will@customerswhoclick.com. Next up, I've got Joris Byron with me, and we're going to be talking about conversion optimization. But until then, keep those customers clicking.